Adolescent adults. Is there such a thing? And what does that mean for the rest of us? Hi, I'm Dr. Jarek Conrad. Welcome to Healthy and Black, where I share information about the state of health for Black America across 7 categories, from emotional health to physical health. I became plant-based over 15 years ago after losing so many of my family members to chronic health issues. Now I want to help you take control of your health. Welcome to this episode of Healthy and Black. I haven't even really spoken privately a lot about the election. It's been a month now, and I've really been still trying to process what we saw, all of it, the outcome, the divisiveness and rhetoric going into it, just all of it. You know, what did we see? What are we experiencing? And what does this mean for our future? Now, I have a theory, but I'm going to need you to stick with me on this one. I think that we are at a bit of an inflection point. If you think about the old fable, the tortoise and the hare, I would think of human beings as the tortoise, and I would think of technology as the hare. So technology is moving fast, it's doing circles around us, right? And human beings are just, moving slowly. At some point in this race, though, this doesn't work because human beings still have to be able to control the technology. We have to be able to live with the technology we create. And it almost seems as though we're getting to the point where we may not be responsible enough to handle this immense technological capabilities that we are creating. So keep that fable in mind. We evolve very slowly. You've heard me say on other episodes of this podcast that we are, in many ways, we're still like the ancient humans back on the African savannas. Well, we're just trying to watch out. We don't want to get eaten. We're watching out for saber-toothed tigers. We're fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I talked about this a lot in the last episode around emotional intelligence. But that's still who we are. You fast forward to modern day life, and we're trying to operate with those same sets of skills. Our brains are remarkable, but we're vulnerable at the same time. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot coming at us. I want you to think about those 7 dimensions of health that I talk about: emotional health, physical health, mental health, professional health, financial health, social health, and family health. And I want you to think about all the variables that push and pull at us in each of those dimensions. So think about government and politics. So this election, a lot of people have been stressed out pre and post-election and wondering what this all means. We have wars going on that real time we turn on the television and we see. So there's a lot going on from that standpoint. The economy is always a big issue that is in the back of our minds, and it's causing some degree of fear for some people. Climate change. Every year, we're experiencing record numbers of billion-dollar climate disasters. These 1 in every 100-year storms are happening way more frequently, as experts predicted they would. So the last data that I'm looking at says in 2024, we had 24 confirmed weather climate disaster events with losses that exceeded $1 billion. 24. If you look at the average from 1980 to 2023, there was 8.5 events like that a year. We've had 24. So certainly something's happening. Public safety is an issue. I have little ones. School shootings, gun violence in general has been a challenge. And so a lot of people are afraid about that now. In some ways, uh, some of this fear has been induced. Oh, the streets are not safe. Back when we were little, it was safe out. You could take your kids, you can leave them outside. I grew up in the 70s, and the violent crime rate was worse than it is today. We get this kind of nostalgia about the past. So there's fear around that. So we have all these elements. And then add to that when you're a person who's in an underrepresented group. So you're a Black person, you're a woman in a male dominated workplace, you are a Muslim in a Christian dominated society, whatever that difference is, there is an added element of stress, pressure, sometimes fear that's on top of that. So we get all this stuff going on, all this stuff coming at us, and we still have, this mechanism of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And we're trying to sort out what we want to do as it relates to all that. And a lot of times we resort to another very important practice that got us through those early days when we were running from those saber-toothed tigers. Tribalism has been very necessary for our survival, both when those tigers were chasing us, you were safer if you travel in a pack than on your own. So from a practical standpoint, it made sense. But also something about tribalism allowed us to make decisions together in community and cooperation, and you can work together faster to build things faster, to start to advance society faster. So tribalism has been a wonderful thing. But fast forward to today, we still operate in tribes, but it's scary. Social media enables one to go out and find their particular tribe and never come out of that, only get reinforced with those tribal beliefs. So again, we are still operating with this need for tribalism. We have technology that exploits that in a way that could be damaging for us down the road. We, as human beings, we are designed to seek pleasure, avoid pain, right? Seek pleasure, avoid pain. When we're little, there's not a lot of impulse control. So we want something, we jump, we get it right away. As we mature, we still want to seek that pleasure, but we learn how to temper that impulse control and delay gratification. There's a famous experiment. I'm sure most people who are listening to this have heard of it. It was the marshmallow study. It's really still very relevant, even more relevant, because our impulse control is tested in ways that maybe it hadn't been in the past because of technology. So we're supposed to learn how to delay gratification, make better decisions as we mature. So this gets to the central point of my thesis. I call this the maturity paradox, the maturity paradox. Now stick with me on this one. In many ways, I think people are growing up slower, if at all, but they're getting old quicker. And I put old in parentheses. I put growing up in parentheses. And that's if at all. So they're growing up slower, if at all, and getting old faster. Interesting. What do I mean by that? Well, we do know for part of this equation, we have some data on it that if you go back to just 1980, for instance, and you look at the 5 factors that typically have been the markers for adulthood, full-time work, you're financially independent, you have your own place to stay, you moved out of the house, you're married, and you've had your first child. Those have been historically the markers for adulthood. It's fascinating when you look at 2021, the most recent data I saw, compared to 1980. So in each one of those categories, human beings are waiting later to achieve that milestone. I mean, the marriage one is a big difference. 63% of 25-year-olds were married in 1980. 22% of 25-year-olds were married in 2021. The other numbers are closer. First child, 39%, 17%, so more than double. So we're pushing off those milestones until later in life. Maybe that's not a bad thing. And I say maybe that's not a bad thing because a lot of us aren't ready. I used to joke that I don't think anybody under 30 should ever have kids. I was only partly joking about that because I'm thinking about our frontal lobes. Our frontal lobes, really, really important part of the brain that's still developing into our 20s. Now, some people may develop it earlier in their 20s, some people a little later. But we don't have it, at 18 or 19. We're still working on that. What do the frontal lobes control? Logic, reasoning, judgment, and decision making. Pretty important, huh? Now, those of you who have teenagers, you're probably wondering, they're making decisions that teenagers are supposed to make. They don't have fully formed frontal lobes yet. They're designed to test the boundaries. That's how you know what the boundaries are. Now, of course, it's easy for me to say, but as a parent, sometimes that can be frustrating. So what else do the frontal lobes control? Understanding of social norms. So is it appropriate to do this or say this? Executive functions, including self-control and inhibitions, attention span, and working memory. Ability to process and learn new information. Ability to retrieve that information that has been learned and stored. These are very, very important activities. And when you think about those processes, what could, get in the way? Like everything, stress, trauma, anxiety. And now how many of our young people have stress, trauma, anxiety? That could potentially delay development of these frontal lobes. So maybe it's good that they're not having kids very early on. Plus, when you start going way back in time, when everybody was getting married at 18, 19, 20, life expectancy was about 40. And so by the time you were 20, you're middle aged. So yeah, you probably need to start having some kids, get married and all that. So they're delayed in terms of the things that we typically say you have graduated into adulthood. They haven't graduated into adulthood yet. On the other hand, on the other side, it's like people are getting older sooner. So what do I mean by that? Young people are coming down with a whole host of chronic health issues that used to plague old people. I mean, folks are getting diabetes and heart disease younger. Kids are getting diabetes early age. We have a lot of people getting sick. There's a lot of people who, because of weight challenges, are not mobile. So you have young people who can hardly walk anymore because of being morbidly obese. And so they're walking around with canes and things that were reserved for older people. And what's going on in the brain is fascinating. We're seeing a significant increase in the number of people that have been diagnosed with early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. So from 30 to 45-year-olds, there's a 373% increase. And this is from 2013 to 2017. Again, this was the last data that I could find. A 311% increase among 45 to 54-year-olds. 143% increase among 55 to 64-year-olds. So again, this is early onset dementia. Now the numbers are still very small, but they are increasing at alarming rates. So again, we are getting older or becoming adults later, but getting old sooner. And remember, I said, if at all. So you think about what I said about how the frontal lobe operates, what the frontal lobes control. Now think about what you've seen during this political season when reporters go out and put a microphone in front of somebody and say, well, can you answer this question? Can you tell me why this? Can you tell me why that? And listen to what they say. Oftentimes it's devoid of facts, reality, statistics, data. It's like, well, I feel so and so. And the reporter will say, well, but here's the facts on so and so. Well, I still feel so and so, or I just don't believe that. It seems that quite a few adults are not able to process information. 45.7% of people, so that's 46% of people can't distinguish fact from opinion. This study's been repeated several times. The most recent one I saw was from some researchers at the University of Illinois, one of my alma maters. They listed 10 items, 5 were fact, 5 were fiction, and the participants in the study were supposed to accurately identify what was fact or fiction, and they couldn't do it. Half of them couldn't do it. Fake news can spread 10 times faster than legitimate news, and it may have over 100 times the reach. There may be up to 10,000 cults in America, and cults prey on vulnerabilities, your inability to distinguish fact from fiction, to understand what's real, what's not. 82% of drivers admit to road rage or aggressive driving in the past year. So it's impulse control. So it's dangerous now to flip somebody off or to start an argument about whether you cut me off or not. It's very, very dangerous. We see a lot of public fighting. We see adults at stadiums fighting. We see all kind of videos of, there's a whole series about people behaving badly, whether it's with the parking lot attendant, whether it's with the store clerk. So it's impulse control. Global scores are declining on every emotional intelligence competency. So, I spent the last episode talking about emotional intelligence and what it is and why it's important. Well, it's been going down for almost the past 15 years or so. After rising nearly 30 points over the past century, IQ scores as well have begun to fall. And so emotional intelligence is going down, IQ is going down. You're supposed to struggle with these things in your teenage years. You get those frontal lobes fully developed in your 20s, you mature, and you're able to, or you should be able to, navigate through some of this stuff. But we're struggling. We're struggling. So again, I call this being an adolescent adult, or more affectionately, a big little kid. It's fascinating because you can see it play out. Again, the late night talk shows are great, and I know they edit things and only show certain things, the most egregious of things. But they take a person out on the street and just go and start asking the average person things, and watch how they respond. It's fascinating. Have another theory. I think that we have to be careful. We're concerned a lot about robots becoming too much like people. Maybe our concern should be people becoming too much like robots. Right now, we're being programmed. Way back in the 1900s, we learned about classical and operant conditioning. You all remember Pavlov and classical conditioning. So, over time, a dog, when he heard the whistle, he just immediately start to salivate because that means I'm about to eat. So it's like it becomes an involuntary impulse. My brain subconsciously start to do it because I hear that whistle. Or operant conditioning. So I do something, I get a treat. So I do it again, I get a treat. this is how we're behaving as human beings. In many ways, the media, cable news, certainly social media is conditioning us, and they're using both forms of conditioning to try and get us to respond the way they would want us to respond. So how do we combat all of this? What do we do to make sure that we are not adolescent adults, that we are not being conditioned in a way that we're no longer using those all-important frontal lobes that give us the tools that we need to make sound decisions on a consistent basis for the long haul? It goes back to emotional intelligence. So again, go back, look at episode 6, where I talk in depth about EI. Why is it important? EI, to me, unlocks the door to critical thinking. Once you have emotional intelligence and that impulse control, for instance, you can take in information without rushing to judgment. Once you take that information in, you can start to process it without your emotions trying to force you to go one way or another just to be with the tribe or just to be against a tribe or whatever reason it might be that doesn't have to do with the rational, logical processing of that information. So emotional intelligence is key. Invest in it, practice with it. And let me leave you with this. Most people are ordinary, right? That's the definition of average or ordinary. It's most people. It doesn't take a whole lot to be extraordinary. It doesn't take a whole lot to do that. What are some characteristics of the ordinary or average person? Well, that person is overweight, 74% of people. That person has at least one chronic disease, such as heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, 60% of people. That person eats mostly processed food. 70% of the average person's diet is processed. That person fails to get 30 minutes of exercise a day. That's 53% of the population. That person drinks more than 10 alcoholic beverages per week. 64% of the population. That person admits that they are addicted to their cell phones. About 57% of the people admit that. And they spend over 2 hours per day on social media, even though they admit that it has a negative impact on their mental health. So those are the things that most people, ordinary people, average people do. All you have to do is don't do those things. You got to do the things that other people can't or won't do. And you can be extraordinary. So I hope this gives you something to think about. It's a scary time if what I'm saying is true about this growing number of adults that are behaving like adolescents. So these adolescent adults, we are going to have to figure out as a society how to combat that. We're going to have to reach our kids when they're still in those adolescent phases, and we got to get them what they need, give them the tools they need to mature through that process, develop those frontal lobes, and become adults. It's critical that we figure this out. Until we meet again, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Healthy and Black. I'm your host, Dr. Jarek Conrad. If you have feedback on today's episode, please email info@jarekconrad.com. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to visit jarekconrad.com to subscribe to my blog. Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends about the podcast. Until next time, don't let culture, cost, or convenience ruin your health.